She sat quietly near the back of the plane, close to the window. As the aircraft climbed smoothly through the calm morning sky, no one noticed her when boarding. She did not speak to anyone, did not ask for help, and did not behave like someone who wanted attention. She looked like any ordinary traveler, hands folded, eyes steady, listening to the soft hum of the engines. People around her were busy with their own lives, their own thoughts, their own stories. To them, she was just another face in the crowd. A passenger who blended into the background without effort. The flight attendants moved down the aisle with practiced smiles, offering drinks and small snacks. She simply nodded and took a glass of water. Her calmness made her almost invisible. Even the air marshal, seated several rows ahead, did not look at her twice. Nothing about her suggested that she carried a story that could change the fate of every person on that plane. The weather was clear, the sky soft and blue. Children laughed, a businessman typed on his laptop. A couple whispered to each other. Everything felt peaceful, just a normal flight. But peace in the air is delicate. It can disappear in seconds. Inside the cockpit, the captain and first officer were following routine flight operations. They were experienced and confident. But sometimes life breaks routine without warning. One moment everything is normal, and the next, nothing is out. The first shift in the atmosphere was so small that no one noticed it. A slight bump in altitude, a small delay in a routine announcement, then a long pause from the cockpit speaker. People glanced around but brushed it off. Turbulence, maybe. A technical delay. Nothing unusual. But then the aircraft tilted slightly to one side, not dangerously, but strangely. Passengers murmured. The cabin crew tried to stay calm, reassuring people that everything was fine, though even they sensed something was off. The plane was flying, yes, but not with the same smooth rhythm. Moments later, the chief attendant hurried toward the cockpit. She knocked gently at first, then a little harder. No response. Her smile faded. She knocked again, her voice low but urgent. Another attendant joined her. Still no answer from inside. Passengers watched with growing unease. The attendants whispered, their faces pale, their hands tightening around the door handle. The cockpit remained locked, silent, completely still. The air marshal stood slowly. His trained eyes caught every detail. He walked toward the front, calm but alert. He whispered something to the crew, who stepped aside. He used a special code to unlock the cockpit door. As it opened, a cold, heavy silence fell across the cabin. Inside, both pilots were slumped in their seats, unconscious. Their breathing was shallow, but they were alive. Nothing looked violent or threatening, but something had clearly gone wrong. The air marshal checked the controls. Everything was active, but the plane was essentially flying on its own. It could not continue like this for long. The attendants gasped softly, covering their mouths. Fear rose across the cabin like a slow wave. No one screamed, but the worry was real, spreading from person to person. People knew something serious had happened, even without an announcement. The air marshal took a deep breath. He knew how to secure a cockpit, how to protect passengers, how to respond to danger. But he was not trained to land a commercial aircraft. He tried speaking into the radio, calling for help, but the responses were faint and inconsistent. Something was interfering with the communication system. They had limited time to fix this before the situation became worse. He stepped back into the cabin, scanning the passengers. Does anyone here have flying experience? He asked firmly, but without panic. The question cut through the silence. People looked at one another, confused, frightened, unsure. A few hands lifted hesitantly. Small experience. Hobby flying. Nothing close to landing a large jet. The air marshal shook his head. They needed someone who knew how to handle pressure. At high altitude, someone calm, steady, capable. That was when his eyes stopped on her, the quiet woman near the back. She was not panicking. She was not trembling. She was simply watching, her gaze steady, as if she understood more than she should. The Air Marshal hesitated. Something about her presence felt different, quiet, disciplined, controlled. He approached slowly, unsure why he felt drawn to her. "Ma'am," he said softly, "do you have any experience flying?" His voice held a mix of hope and uncertainty. She looked up, surprised that anyone was speaking to her. For a second, she said nothing. The cabin waited. Every heartbeat felt louder. Even the engine seemed quieter. Then she exhaled, almost like she had been avoiding this moment for years. "I haven't flown in a long time," she said in a low voice. "But I can try." The Air Marshal studied her eyes. They held something he recognized: focus, discipline, something trained but hidden. He knew instantly that she was not just an ordinary passenger. And for the first time since the cockpit door opened, he felt a small spark of hope. The cabin became completely silent after her answer. People turned in their seats, staring at her as if she had spoken a secret language. No one expected help to come from the quiet woman in the back. Even she seemed unsure of her own words, like she had opened a door she never planned to walk through again. The Air Marshal offered his hand, guiding her gently toward the front of the plane. She walked slowly at first, almost like she was remembering steps she had not taken in years. With every row she passed, eyes followed her, hope rising in some faces and doubt in others. The Air Marshal noticed that she did not shrink under the pressure. Instead, her posture straightened a little, as though something inside her was waking up. When they reached the cockpit door, she paused. Her breath caught for a moment as she looked inside. The sight of the unconscious pilots brought back memories she had buried deeply. She touched the side of the doorway, grounding herself. The Air Marshal watched closely. He could see that her hesitation was not fear, it was something more complicated. A mix of old responsibility and a life she had left behind. She stepped into the cockpit carefully, her hands brushing lightly across the controls without touching anything. It was like watching someone return to a childhood home, familiar but changed. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "It's been a long time." The Air Marshal stood behind her, unsure whether she was speaking to him or to the memory she carried. The attendant stood outside the door, trying to stay calm. One asked the Air Marshal quietly, "Do you trust her?" He answered without looking away from the cockpit, "Something tells me she knows more than she's saying." His voice wasn't confident, but it wasn't doubtful either. It carried a quiet belief. The woman leaned closer to the instrument panels. Many systems were stable, but she could see small alerts, blinking warnings that meant the plane needed an active pilot soon. She did not speak loudly, but every word felt measured and steady. "They kept the autopilot on. That's good. It buys us time." The Air Marshal stepped inside. "Can you fly it?" he asked. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked at the captain and first officer, still unconscious. "I used to fly," she finally said, "but not like this. Not in years." She placed her hand on the yoke, not moving it, just feeling its weight. Something in her face changed, an old confidence flickering through her eyes. The cabin crew began preparing the passengers, speaking calmly and choosing their words carefully. They still didn't know exactly who the woman was or what she could do, but they sensed she was their best chance. Passengers watched anxiously as the seatbelt signs blinked, though the plane was still flying steadily. A child asked his mother, "Is she a hero?" The mother didn't know how to answer, so she simply whispered, "I think she might be." Inside the cockpit, the woman tested her memory. She checked the throttle, the trim controls, the altitude hold system. Her movements were slow but deliberate, as if she was rebuilding a bridge between who she was and who she had become. The Air Marshal observed silently, trying not to distract her. "I need to contact ground control," she said. "The radios aren't fully down. They're weak, but not gone. Maybe I can get through." Her voice no longer carried uncertainty. Instead, it had a tone of quiet authority. She adjusted the frequency, speaking clearly into the microphone. "Control, this is flight." She paused, realizing she didn't remember the exact flight number. The air marshal helped her, pointing at the label. She continued, "Flight 98 requesting emergency guidance. Both pilots are unconscious. I am attempting to take control." Static filled the speakers. For a moment, hope felt fragile. Then a faint voice crackled through, unclear, but real. The woman leaned closer, focusing intensely. "Repeat," she said, her tone steady. "We need instructions." The voice came again, still weak but more recognizable. The controllers were trying to reach them. The air marshal's shoulders dropped slightly in relief. Communication was not perfect, but it existed. That alone changed everything. She turned to him and said, "I'm going to try to stabilize the descent rate. We're drifting slightly." Her hands tightened on the controls as she gently adjusted the pitch. The plane responded slowly, but correctly. It was like working with an old friend, one she remembered well enough to guide. The air marshal felt his heartbeat slow. He still didn't know who she truly was, but he understood one thing. She was not guessing. She was remembering. Passengers in the cabin could feel the shift. The small tilt they had sensed earlier was gone. The plane leveled out, smooth again. Relief spread through the rows like a quiet wave. People exchanged looks, some whispering prayers, others wiping tears. Back in the cockpit, the woman kept her eyes forward, her mind focused. "This is only the beginning," she murmured. "Landing is the real test." The air marshal heard her, and a question formed in his mind, not about whether she could fly the plane, but about what story she had carried silently all this time, and why she had ever stopped flying. The air marshal watched her closely as she worked, noticing how her hands moved with a strange balance of fear and skill. She wasn't acting like someone learning. She was acting like someone remembering. Every switch she touched, every small correction she made, felt like part of an old rhythm returning to her. But he could also see something inside her fighting something. She wasn't ready to explain. The radio crackled again, this time a little clearer. A controller asked for more details, his voice steady but urgent. "Who is currently at the controls?" he said. She glanced at the air marshal, unsure of how much to reveal. He gave a small nod, letting her choose. She pressed the radio button. "A former pilot," she answered quietly. The cabin crew outside exchanged looks. Passengers leaned forward, listening even though they couldn't make out the words. Just hearing a calm voice from the cockpit helped settle their rising worry. The controller asked her to confirm her training. She hesitated just long enough for the air marshal to sense there was more to her past than she was saying. "I trained on smaller aircraft," she finally replied. "Not this model. But I understand the basics." It wasn't the whole truth. The air marshal could tell instantly. She wasn't just trained. She was experienced. The controller guided her through a series of checks. She followed each instruction, but her hands moved slightly ahead of the instructions she already knew. What was coming? That small detail did not escape the air marshal. He understood now. She wasn't just a former pilot. She had flown something that trained her to stay calm under pressure, something that demanded precision and discipline. She had lived through moments where hesitation wasn't an option. Passengers began to feel a shift again, a strange, quiet confidence spreading through the cabin. People whispered to one another. Some said they believed she was a professional pilot. Others guessed she had military training. A few said she must be someone important, someone who had stepped away from flying for reasons only she knew. Near the back of the plane, an older man looked out the window, the clouds glowing beneath the wings. He whispered, "Whoever she is, she's holding this plane steady." A teenager across the aisle nodded. "She doesn't look scared," he said. Everyone else is scared, but not her. Back in the cockpit, the woman worked through the first major challenge, leveling the altitude while keeping the aircraft stable. When she made a second correction, the autopilot reacted slowly and the aircraft dipped slightly. A collective gasp rose from the cabin. She held the controls firmly, guiding the nose back into position. The air marshal let out a breath. He didn't realize he was holding. "You did that like someone who has done it before," he said quietly. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed on the horizon line. Finally she whispered, "I walked away from flying years ago. I promised myself I wouldn't sit in a cockpit again." Her voice trembled not from fear, but from a memory pulling at her. But life doesn't always respect promises. The air marshal wanted to ask why she left flying, but he saw the heaviness in her eyes. This wasn't the time. She needed focus, not questions. The controller came through again, giving instructions for approaching a lower altitude. She followed them perfectly. Even the way she breathed changed, deep, controlled, steady. For a moment, the air marshal saw not a quiet passenger, but someone who once lived her entire life above the clouds. One of the flight attendants stood near the cockpit door, watching with wide eyes. "She's different," the attendant whispered to another. "She looks like she was born for this." The woman heard the whisper, even though it wasn't meant for her. She closed her eyes briefly, gathering strength. She knew she could not afford a single mistake. The lives of every person on board depended on her regaining skills. She had tried so hard to forget. The controller asked her to prepare for manual control in case the autopilot failed completely. She adjusted the throttle again, this time more confidently. "I can handle it," she said in a firmer voice than before. The air marshal looked at her with new respect. He realized that she wasn't just rescuing the passengers she was facing. A part of herself she had spent years avoiding. She kept her gaze locked on the instruments. "If the autopilot drops," she said softly, "I'll have to fly it fully on my own. And can you?" The air marshal asked. She looked up at him with a calm, steady expression that carried a history he didn't yet understand. "If I must," she said, "I will." A sudden flicker of turbulence ran through the aircraft. Not dangerous, but enough to remind everyone that time was running out. The autopilot blinked, then steadied. She gripped the controls, ready for whatever came next. For the first time since boarding the plane, she no longer felt like a passenger. She felt like someone stepping back into a destiny she thought she had walked away from forever. The turbulence passed as quickly as it came, but it left behind a new tension in the cockpit. The woman kept her hands on the controls even after. The aircraft steadied, as if she expected the sky to test her again. The air marshal noticed how her fingers rested on the yoke, not tight with fear, but firm with purpose. She was no longer doubting herself. She was preparing. The radio voice returned, clearer now. "Flight 98, we are trying to strengthen the signal. Can you confirm the condition of both pilots?" She glanced at the two unconscious men and answered calmly, "They're stable but unresponsive. We need medical assistance upon landing." The controller acknowledged this, then paused before asking, "Ma'am, are you leading the aircraft now?" She hesitated only a second. Yes, there was no more hiding. No more quiet corners or shadows to blend into. The world now knew someone unexpected was guiding a plane full of lives. And yet, her voice stayed calm, almost gentle. The air marshal realized something important at that moment. She wasn't just capable, she was steady in a way only someone who had faced pressure far greater than this could be. The attendant stepped into the cockpit doorway again, watching her with a mixture of hope and disbelief. One of them whispered, "We should let the passengers know something. Not everything, but something." The air marshal nodded and directed them to share only what was necessary. A short announcement echoed through the cabin. "We have a trained passenger assisting with the controls." Please stay seated and remain calm." People exchanged looks, some surprised, some frightened, but the tone of the announcement was reassuring enough that panic did not rise. Slowly, trust began to settle over the cabin. Meanwhile, the woman checked the fuel levels, airspeed, and descent path. Her movements grew faster but more precise, as if pieces of her past were falling back into place. The air marshal watched her work and finally asked the question he had been holding. "Where did you fly before? Civilian or something more?" She didn't answer at first. Instead, she adjusted a setting on the navigation panel. Only when everything was steady again did she speak. "I flew for a short time. Professionally, then something happened. I stepped away." Her tone was simple, but the silence after her words held a story too heavy to tell in the sky. The air marshal didn't press. Whatever she walked away from, she wasn't ready to share. Not yet. The controller instructed her to begin a slow descent, guiding her step by step. She followed the instructions, but the air marshal noticed she made slight improvements, small corrections that weren't asked for, but made the descent smoother. It was the kind of instinct that cannot be taught quickly. It comes from hours, years, countless flights. She was more than a former pilot. As the plane dipped gently, passengers felt the movement. People held onto the armrests, some whispered prayers again. But unlike before, there was something new in the air faith. They didn't know her face, her name, or her past, but they believed in her now. The older man near the window smiled shakily. "Whoever she is, she's guiding us down." A woman beside him nodded, her voice trembling. "She's doing something brave. Something she didn't plan for." In the cockpit, the woman focused on the horizon. "Altitude decreasing smoothly," she reported into the radio. Her voice held no fear, only determination. "Copy that. Flight 98, the controller replied. "You're doing well. We'll direct you to the nearest runway. Expect contact from airport approach soon." She nodded, even though they couldn't see her. She felt a strange mix inside her. Fear of failing, fear of reconnecting with a part of her past, and a deep, unexpected sense of responsibility. She had not planned to fly again, but now she was the only one who could. "Why did you really stop flying?" the air marshal asked quietly. This time, her face softened. She did not avoid the question. "I lost someone," she said, her voice steady but fragile. "After that, I couldn't touch a cockpit. I couldn't even look at a plane without remembering." She let out a slow breath. "I thought leaving the sky would heal everything. But maybe it didn't." The air marshal understood. Not every wound screams. Some just sit quietly until life forces them open. Before either of them could say more, the radio lit up again. A new voice came through airport approach control. "Flight 98, we have your signal. Prepare for landing instructions." This was the moment she had been both waiting for and fearing. She swallowed softly. Understood. The air marshal saw something shift in her eyes. Not fear. Not uncertainty. Acceptance. She was ready to return to the sky she once left behind. Asterisk. The new voice on the radio carried a calm authority, the kind that could steady even the most shaken pilot. "Flight 98, reduce altitude to 10,000 feet. Begin preparing for manual landing." The woman listened carefully. Her fingers tightened slightly on the controls as she repeated the instructions. The air marshal noticed she no longer hesitated when speaking. Something inside her had shifted. She had stepped back into a role she thought she had abandoned forever. As the plane descended, a thin layer of clouds brushed past the windows. Passengers watched in silence, some gripping the hand of the person next to them, some praying quietly. Others simply staring at the seatback in front of them because they didn't know what else to do. The teenagers who had whispered earlier were now sitting upright, their eyes wide but hopeful. The older man near the window whispered, "She's guiding us home." In the cockpit, the woman studied the runway approach displayed on the screen. The indicators moved slowly, aligning with the path she needed. But there was something she hadn't told anyone, yet something she had hoped wouldn't matter, but now it did. She took a deep breath. This plane is heavier than what I used to fly, she said quietly to the air marshal. Much heavier. Timing and speed are different. She wasn't saying it out of fear. She was saying it because the sky respects honesty. And so did she. Can you still land it? The air marshal asked. She looked down at her hands, the same. Hands that once guided aircraft through storms, darkness, and long, lonely skies. I can, she said at last. I just need to trust myself again. The air marshal nodded. Then trust yourself, we all do. The radio crackled. Flight 98 winds are light. Runway is clear. You'll be first priority for landing. She acknowledged the message, her voice steady. But inside her chest, a quiet storm was stirring memories of her last flight. The one she walked away from, the one she never spoke about. She pushed the memory aside. This moment required a different kind of strength. The cabin crew began preparing passengers for landing. They moved down the aisle, securing trays, checking seat belts, offering comforting smiles, even though their own eyes were filled with worry. One attendant paused outside the cockpit, watching the woman. We believe in you, she whispered. The woman didn't turn around, but a small, grateful smile touched the corner of her mouth. As the airport tower provided step-by-step guidance. She began adjusting the flaps. Her movements were slow at first, then smoother as muscle memory returned. For the first time since boarding the plane, she felt like she had purpose again, not forced purpose, but chosen. A purpose she thought she had buried. Speed is good, she murmured. Altitude steady. She felt the aircraft respond to her, almost like it recognized the hands guiding it. The air marshal watched in quiet awe. He had seen courage before, not like this, quiet, deliberate, shaped by loss, but powered by resolve. Then the radio relayed something unexpected. Flight 98, be advised your communication signal is dropping again. Stay calm, we're here. The signal flickered, the voice faded, and then only static. The woman and the air marshal exchanged a quick look. She tried adjusting the frequency. No response. She tried again. Nothing. Signal's gone, she said softly. The air marshal swallowed. Can you still land without them? She looked ahead at the sky opening in front of the aircraft, the faint outline of the runway shining through thin clouds. I'll have to, she replied. I just need to trust my training. Her hands moved on the controls with new determination. She guided the aircraft lower, watching the distance shrink. The runway grew clear along, dark, steady. Passengers felt the descent and held their breath. In the cabin, the older man whispered, she's doing it alone now. A little girl near the front asked her mother, is the lady brave? Her mother nodded softly. Yes, very brave. Inside the cockpit, the woman felt the weight of every life on board, but instead of crushing her, it centered her. She whispered, under her breath, all right, one step at a time. She steadied the descent rate, adjusted the flaps once more, checked the horizon. Every motion was a conversation between her and the machine, a silent agreement that they would do this together. Air Marshal stood beside her, ready for anything she needed. Just say the word, she nodded. Once we reach final approach, I'll need full focus. No distractions. Understood. The runway was now in clear view. Close enough to touch, yet far enough to require perfect control. She whispered, this is the part one feared most. But her eyes stayed forward. She was ready to face the moment she had been running from for years. The aircraft dipped into its final approach, the runway now stretching out ahead like a long, quiet promise. The woman tightened her grip on the whip yoke, her breath steady but deep. Every sound inside the cockpit felt louder, the hum of the engines, the soft click of switches, the faint tremble of metal responding to her touch. She could feel the weight of the entire moment pressing gently onto her shoulders. Not crushing her, just reminding her that this time, she was not allowed to walk away. The air marshal stood close, watching her with a kind of respect he rarely gave anyone. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "you've already given these people more hope than they had an hour ago." She didn't look at him, but she nodded. Her eyes were fixed straight ahead. The world outside seemed smaller now, just clouds. Sky and a runway waiting in the distance. Passengers sensed the shift too. A strange silence wrapped around the cabin, as if everyone understood that the next few minutes mattered more than anything. A child squeezed her mother's hand. A college student whispered a promise to call home if they landed safely. The older man near the window closed his eyes and whispered, "Let her strength be enough." In the cockpit, the woman lowered the landing gear. The sound echoed through the aircraft, a deep mechanical thud that made several passengers sit up. Straighter, she checked everything: speed, alignment, altitude. Her voice was soft but sure. "We're stable. Still on path." The air marshal glanced out the front window. "You're doing well." "I have to," she answered. "Not for me, for them." She didn't need to gesture back toward the cabin. The air marshal knew exactly who she meant, every scared soul, hoping she would be the miracle they never expected. The runway grew larger. The ground slowly approached. She eased back on the throttle, feeling the aircraft respond like an old friend stretching awake after a long sleep. The feeling stirred something inside her, something she had pushed down for years. She remembered her last landing, the day she walked away, the silence after losing someone who once sat beside her in a cockpit, just like this. She had promised herself never to return because flying reminded her of everything she couldn't save. Now, in this moment, she realized something she had never allowed herself to understand. Stepping away hadn't healed her. It had only kept her from discovering the courage she still carried. "Altitude decreasing," she murmured. "Speed a little high." The air marshal watched her fingers make tiny adjustments, guiding the plane with a calmness that felt almost impossible. She wasn't fighting fear anymore. She was guiding it. As the plane descended further, the static-filled radio crackled. The woman froze for a second, then leaned closer. "We hear you, Flight 98. Continue your descent." The signal cut in and out. The words barely made sense, but they were enough to remind her she wasn't completely alone. She whispered back, "Understood. Continuing descent." The air marshal touched the back of the co-pilot's seat, steadying himself as the aircraft dipped a little more. "If you need anything, just say it." She shook her head gently. "Right now, all I need is silence." He stepped back, giving her space. The cabin vibrated slightly as the plane met a light gust of wind. Passengers gasped again, hands flying to armrests. But she corrected the path instantly, smoothly, gracefully, as if she had never taken a break from flying at all. The older man opened his eyes. "She saved us from that," he whispered. A younger woman beside him nodded, tears in her eyes. "She's fighting for all of us." Inside the cockpit, the runway lights shone brighter. The nose of the aircraft pointed perfectly toward the center line. She lowered the speed further. The engine slowed. The descent smoothed out into a controlled glide. "This is it," she whispered to herself. The air marshal heard her but didn't speak. For the first time since entering the cockpit, she allowed herself one brief moment of honesty, a moment where fear and strength stood side by side. I hope this time ends differently." She wasn't talking about the landing. She was talking about her past, about the moment that had broken her so deeply. She had walked away from the sky she loved. Now she was returning to it, not for herself, but for every life depending on her. The ground moved closer. The runway stretched ahead, and her hands guided the plane into the final moments that would decide everything. The wheels approached the runway so slowly that the air inside the cabin seemed to stop moving. Passengers held their breath, eyes wide, hands gripping armrests, seatbelts, or the person closest to them. The whole plane felt like it was balanced on a single moment, a moment guided only by the quiet woman who had once promised herself she would never fly again. Inside the cockpit, she leaned forward, steady and focused. Her eyes traced the center line of the runway as if it were a lifeline, drawn across the earth just for her. "Easy, steady," she whispered, her hands guiding the yoke with gentle precision. The air marshal watched her, hardly daring to blink. "You're right on track," he said softly, as if afraid his voice might shift the aircraft. She didn't answer. She was listening. Only to the plane, the small vibrations of the wings, the soft hum of the engines, the way the nose lowered inch by inch. For the first time since she returned to a cockpit, her fear was gone. Instead, there was something else: quiet acceptance. She knew now that running from the sky had never healed her. Only facing it could. The wheels kissed the runway, not with force, but with a soft bounce, like the plane itself had been holding its breath. A few passengers gasped. Others cried out softly, overwhelmed by relief. But it wasn't over yet. She held the controls firmly, lowering the nose wheel, guiding the aircraft straight and steady. A long, slow rumble filled the cabin as the wheels settled fully onto the ground. She activated the reverse thrust, the engines shifting tone as the plane slowed. The runway lights flashed past the windows, each one marking another second of safety regained. The air marshal finally released a breath. "You're doing it," he whispered. "You're bringing them home." She didn't smile yet. Not until the plane was fully under control. Not until she was sure every life behind her was truly safe. The aircraft rolled to a smooth stop. Silence followed, heavy, emotional silence, until it broke with a wave of applause from the cabin. It wasn't loud at first, more like a trembling thank you rising from the hearts of people who had been sure they might not see the ground again. Then the applause grew, echoing through the cabin, filled with relief, disbelief, gratitude. The woman sat back, her hands finally letting go of the controls. She exhaled softly, her shoulders dropping as if she had just set down years of weight. The air marshal placed a hand lightly on the seat behind her. "You saved them," he said. "Every single one." She looked out the cockpit window at the runway lights glowing softly in the distance. "I didn't save them alone," she said quietly. "They trusted me when I didn't trust myself." The cockpit door opened, and two attendants stood there with tears in their eyes. "Everyone wants to thank you," one whispered. "They want to see the woman who brought them back." She stepped out slowly. When the passengers saw her, they rose to their feet, clapping, crying, calling out words of gratitude. She wasn't used to attention. She had spent years avoiding it. But now, standing in the aisle with hundreds of faces turned toward her, she felt something surprising, a sense of peace she had never expected to find again. The older man near the window wiped his eyes. "You gave us our lives back," he said. "How can we thank you?" She shook her head gently. "Just live them well," she replied. "That's enough." Paramedics arrived soon after, taking the unconscious pilots for treatment. The crew guided passengers off the plane, but many paused to look back at her, to say thank you one more time, to smile, or simply to acknowledge the courage they had witnessed. When the cabin finally emptied, the air marshal approached her again. "You were meant for this," he said. "You didn't lose who you were. You just forgot for a while." She looked at the empty seats, the aisle she had walked earlier as just a quiet, unnoticed passenger. "Maybe you're right," she said softly. "Maybe the sky wasn't done with me." As she walked down the steps onto the runway, a soft breeze brushed her face. For years she had avoided it, thinking it carried memories too heavy to bear. But today, it felt different, lighter, kinder. She tilted her head slightly upward, looking at the open sky, not as a place she once lost someone, but as a place she finally found herself again.